Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Wood again, and a topic I just thought I'd briefly talk about. Something you may see in looking up some of your research articles is the term called impact factor. I'm not sure if anyone has actually heard of that before, but it's an interesting stat about journals. It kind of denotes how kind of a big deal or big time a journal actually is. And so I'll briefly talk about what impact factor is and how you might want to look at it in terms of evaluating pieces of literature and what sort of credence you can put into a piece of literature, right? When talking about, is this coming from a good journal or is it a bad journal, so to speak? So I'm just starting off right here at the NOVA Southeastern HPD Library. Again, I usually start off by going to databases here, and we're going to go to my J, and this is going to be called the Journal Citation Reports. So you can go to that. And basically any article or journal that you're pulling from, you can actually input into here and determine what its impact factor is. So I've already got a few already pulled up here, but this is nice because you can actually browse by journals themselves. You can browse by the category that you're interested in. So if you want to look up like orthopedics or surgery or pharmacy or whatever the case may be, you can look it up based off of that. So just to give you a few examples I have pulled up here, here's one for the journal Clinical Toxicology. Again, I talk about what I know, and tox is what I know. So Clinical Toxicology is kind of the gold standard toxicology journal that most people use who are interested in the field. So you can see here kind of the basic information about the journal itself. The thing I want to draw your attention to, because there's a lot of numbers here that I'm not too particularly interested in, but the one that is good to know is the actual journal impact factor, which you can see here. And this is something that gets calculated year by year. You can see 2017 is the latest year they have available, and it has an impact factor of 4.381. What does that mean, though? Essentially, impact factor is the number of times that a piece of literature within a journal has been cited over the number of items that they've actually published. So for instance, if I were to publish 10 pieces of literature in the Dr. Wood Journal of Pharmacy, for instance, and I had 10 citations in other journals, like somebody decided to write a paper and they cited me, just like you've cited some different research articles for your papers, 10 divided by 10, I would have an impact factor of 1. Obviously, the higher this number is, the better off, or kind of the you could say the more kind of big time or the more important a journal is based off of that impact factor. So it's actually one of those things that's kind of like talking about like how big of an engine you have in your car, or how big your salary is, or whatever you want to use to try to validate your existence on this world. The journals kind of do the same thing with impact factors, right? And so the bigger the number, the better your journal is, because that means more people are citing your journal or citing pieces of literature within your journal, meaning that it's important, right? So as an example here, here's one we can see in 2017, they published 189 items and they had 828 citations, right? And so that means that for every one of these articles they published out, they had about 4 citations being pulled from that, right? So you may find that just in general, a lot of their articles get cited a lot, or you could have one really big kind of groundbreaking research that got cited a lot of times. It all kind of evens out, and so this is where you get this number 4.381. This varies widely depending on how big of a journal you're talking about. So as an example, as a comparison, here's kind of a more small journal. This is the Journal of Toxicology, Clinical Toxicology here. This is not something that you normally think about publishing in right off the bat if you had like a tox-related article. And that makes sense because when you look at the total number of recent items they've had in 2017, based on the number of citations, you can see they only have an impact factor of 1.988. So if you were to compare journals in toxicology, you say, well, obviously clinical toxicology is more important, air quotes, because it's being cited more frequently by other people. Okay, so again, the more it's cited, the more important that piece of literature is. Okay. Now, again, toxicology is pretty niche in general, right? It's a very small part of medicine compared to something, like cancer or pediatrics, etc. And so you'll find that depending on how niche your particular topic is, the smaller the impact factors tend to be, right? So we saw 4.3 for, ClinTox, which is kind of like our big one. Well, let's look at something that is a little bit more most people know the name of this journal here. So let's look at the New England Journal of Medicine, right? Most people have probably heard about this, even lay people know about the New England Journal of Medicine, right? So looking at this is so important. It gets its own special page and everything. Its impact factor for 2017 was 79. That means that every article that they published in their journal got cited an average of 79 times. This is very, very important literature, which means they're really only accepting the best of the best sort of research. Now, why might you care about that? Say, for instance, you had a case report that you found on rotations that you wanted to publish. Well, generally speaking, the smaller the impact factor for a journal, the easier it probably is to get published in it, especially if you don't really have a big name behind yourself, especially if you don't have a really groundbreaking piece of literature. To get published in the New England Journal of Medicine, you're going to need like a really big deal study that has a lot of funding behind it, that's like changing the world, right? You're saying, here's how we're going to, we reduce mortality in this type of cancer by 50%. Like, that's worthy of the New England Journal of Medicine, right? Versus something like, I have a case report where, I had an interesting case of, the vancomycin causing a weird side effect, right? That's generally going to be more relegated to smaller journals. So if, in case you had a case report or something you wanted to publish and you wanted to, say, look into different types of journals that are out there, look for ones with smaller impact factors, because you might have an easier time getting those accepted. And again, publication is a publication, right? Anything you can put on your CV is going to look good, especially when you're looking for jobs, right? So if you can say, hey, look, I had a study published in a surgery journal. No one really cares if it's a rinky-dink journal or not. You still had a publication. That looks a lot better than someone that has no publications. Just to give a comparison to the New England Journal of Medicine, here's something like JAMA. You can see here, not as big of an impact factor, only about 47 as compared to New England Journal of Medicine. That's still huge, right? That's still a lot of citations getting made for each article they put in there. Keep in mind, JAMA also has a lot of kind of branching off sort of subsections of their journal. So you'll find that there's like JAMA Oncology, JAMA Pediatrics. And so that may lead to a little bit of the deflation of that impact factor a little bit there. But still, it's a good way to kind of compare journals together to see how they really stack up in terms of importance, so to speak. One other nice thing you can do if you were to look in the this journal citation reports here. So say, for instance, I went back to the homepage. Let's see, I can do it over here. And I wanted to browse by category. This is actually nice because you can go through, and one of the things you can talk about when you're talking about the strengths or the weaknesses of a piece of literature, you can talk about the journal that it came from and talk about its impact factor and how important it is in kind of the grand scheme of things. So as an example, let's look here for, say, surgery, right? So this is the different categories. If I wanted to, I could look in pharmacology, I can look in neurology, but let's go to surgery. So I know some of you probably are interested in surgery. And you can see it's kind of overall impact factor versus some of the other categories out there. But what's interesting here is if you look at the actual journals graph, you can get a ranking by clicking on that. You get a ranking of all the different journals that fit within that surgery category and have an idea about its individual impact factor, right? So again, looking here, you have the Annals of Surgery has the highest at 9.2. You have JAMA Surgery at 8.4. These are kind of the top dogs. So if you had a really groundbreaking surgery article, this is where you'd want to publish it at, right? Versus if you can scroll down, we saw there's 200 in there, so if I had like a little case report that I found on rotations, I could probably say, well, maybe it was something interesting to do with, pediatric neurosurgery. It's more niche, so it has a smaller impact factor, and it might be easier to publish in. Just something to think about overall. So anyway, so that's impact factors. If you have any questions about that, please let me know. Again, it's not like the end-all be-all of a journal. It doesn't make something technically a bad journal or a good journal, but it typically gives you an idea about the importance of it, kind of in the grand pantheon. And again, when you're talking about an individual piece of literature, you can say, well, this I think is a very important piece of literature because it came from the Annals of Surgery, which had an impact factor of 9.2. It was ranked number 1 out of all surgery journals, right? That's a point you can make, a little bit of a feather in a cap, to say, hey, this is an important piece of literature. This is why I think it's a strong piece of literature. So something to think about. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Thanks so much. Bye.